to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 13th, 2015, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. Pretty much at the middle of the month of May, coming up on the Memorial Day weekend, the official start of summer. Summer's just a few weeks away, which is going to be a real shock to all those people across the U.S. who are still dealing with snow. Anyway, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, tomorrow in our third hour, Michelle Rosen of the Tylenol murders is going to be our guest once again. New developments in her quest to publicize the story, to get funding for a documentary film about the subject. And even all these years later, she is coming up against orchestrated resistance. There are certain parties who do not want this story to come on out. I got an email the other day from somebody saying, it's not even relevant to today. Why are you wasting your time? Well, it is actually relevant to today because the Tylenol story underscores the fact that corporations and the government and the media have been lying to you all along. It's not a new phenomenon. What is new is we know what's going on and the extent to which it's going on. And that's why this story is very important and very pertinent to what's going on. Now, as you probably have already heard, there's been a horrendous train derailment over in Philadelphia. 7 dead, over 140 hurt. They still don't even have an accurate number of how many people were actually on the train when it went off the rails. But it basically came off the tracks and rolled onto its side in the Port Richmond section of Philadelphia. I was half expecting Rita Katz to start screaming, oh, ISIS did it. ISIS took credit on one of their Muslim websites. ISIS made the driver go fast. And as you heard on the news report, they have identified what went wrong, which was kind of interesting because the finger pointing was getting serious about that. Oh, it's a lack of maintenance, a lack of this, it's a lack of that. But at this point, it looks like the train was being operated almost double the speed limit for the tracks. And unless you've worked with railroading, it may come as a surprise. Railroad train tracks have speed limits the same as ordinary roads, having to do with how much stress the rails will be able to withstand. But in this case, the engineer was way over the speed limit, and of course, under that kind of a stress, you know, there's going to be a problem. A lot of people are saying high cost of ignoring infrastructure. Well, yeah, our infrastructure is third rate in this country. But in this particular case, you know, the infrastructure might have survived the fast train, but we have an issue here. The engineer was operating the train way too fast. Maybe they're going to claim he was suicidal or something to get some corporation off the hook here. Obama came out saying he's shocked and deeply saddened over the train crash, even though he has presided over the deterioration of our national infrastructure. And somebody sent me this story from back in 2013 that may be germane to this engineer ignoring the speed limit. And this had to do with December of 2013. William Rockefeller was an engineer up in New York City, and they basically said the problem was he was loaded up on prescription drugs, he was sleep deprived, they were working shift rotations, and basically that puts anybody into a mental state where they're going to make really dumb mistakes. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe this guy was on SSRIs. Maybe he was trying to get back up on the schedule. Everything's running too close to the edge, and tragedy happens here. Now then, the White House is continuing to thrash around regarding Seymour Hersh's article, pointing out that at least some segments of the official story of the raid that got bin Laden were made up, complete fiction, to try and make President Obama and the U.S. look good, like they were the ones who had gone in and gotten bin Laden. Now, when this event, this raid first took place, we reported on whatreallyhappened.com that it was Pakistan that had gone in there first. And they didn't even know who was in there. And somebody else said, we think it's bin Laden, and just things spiraled out of control. Now, NBC has confirmed the facts for themselves. So has the New York Times. So now the White House is dealing with the fact that at least part of the story of the Osama bin Laden raid has been revealed to be a fraud. However, I point out, neither Seymour Hersh, nor NBC, nor the New York Times had the courage to take that next step forward in saying, look, we know that part of that story is a complete fiction. How do we know who was actually killed in that house? Was it really bin Laden? We don't know. They dumped the body in the ocean. So we got into our little Wayback Machine, and we found a couple of video interviews of eyewitnesses to the actual raid, who were saying they knew who was living in that house. It wasn't bin Laden. They're talking about the helicopter crash when the U.S. went in to grab bin Laden so they could stuff him and put him on display in the Capitol Rotunda. And we found two of these videos, and they're up there. So the White House is out there saying, oh, this is all nonsense, it's old news, blah, 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 blah. No, they went in there, they had somebody that was apparently a convincing bin Laden to somebody, and they figured, we'll grab him, we'll bring him home, we'll look like we're the heroes, we got the ultimate villain. And then they actually got into the house, realized that the guy who was there was not going to fool anybody that he was Osama bin Laden. So they shot him and dumped him in the ocean, came back home and put all these very hastily assembled, poor quality, faked photos all over the net to convince us all that the U.S., yes, indeed, had really gotten Osama bin Laden. They were very easy to tear apart. We found the source images from motion pictures used to create the fakes. You can't get away with this kind of deception in the age of the Internet. It's just not possible. And I would like to see the corporate media suck it up, grow some spine, and take that next step to say, that was not Osama bin Laden in that house in Abbottabad. The real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes in December of 2001. His funeral notice was in all the foreign press. Even Fox News at one point acknowledged bin Laden was dead. Then they pulled it back because the U.S., we need bin Laden. We need to wag bin Laden at the American people. And they came up with all these fakes. And what's amazing, if you go on Wikipedia and you look at any article about Osama bin Laden, it's illustrated with a picture of one of the fakes. They don't have pictures of the real bin Laden. They got the fake guy. They're trying to say, yes, this is bin Laden, really. You will believe this is bin Laden. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Peter in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I wanted to just point out something that whatever the story is, we know that the government is just flat out freaking lying.
About everything.
About everything and about this bin Laden thing. We've known that. You've talked about it. I've talked about it with you on the air before. But I want to point something out, and that is that this is such a big lie and involves goes all the way up to the president, his nose getting longer and longer in front of the whole world, that this calls into serious question the fate of SEAL Team 6 weeks later. When they were put, and I will tell you that honestly, I think I've mentioned before, I spent a lot of years in the military and was I planned and participated in a lot of heliborne assaults, both real and training. And you don't go in with Chinooks. They put like 30 or 35 of these SEALs into a Chinook. This is 6 weeks after the supposed raid on Abbottabad.
Okay, Peter, we're going to have to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I want to come back and hear the rest of the story because I've got something I need to add to it. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right back to Peter in California talking about the strange fate of SEAL Team 6 only weeks after this raid in Abbottabad that supposedly, we were told, got Osama bin Laden, and now we have confirmation from Seymour Hersh, New York Times, NBC, at least part of the story is a complete fabrication. The next step is to say, is the entire story a complete fabrication? We know the answer is yes. Pete?
Well, and not only that, Mike, but what I'm at least opening a question is just how far, if they lied about this, they lied about the weapons of mass destruction, lied about all this stuff, how far would they go to cover that lie up? And I will tell you that in this mysterious demise of about 30 members of SEAL Team 6, and even the Hirsch article says they went in with 24 to the Abbottabad, that they were in a Chinook, a CH-47, which is an admin logistics type of bird, and you don't do assaults in. The SEALs have a tremendous budget. And after that Desert One thing in 1980, which under Jimmy Carter, they kept the special operations pilots and aircraft organic to the special ops teams. I mean, they travel with them, they train with them. So these guys don't need to do any assaults in CH-47s. They've got their own, far more robust armored and armed
and the rest of it here.
Blackhawks.
Well,
yes.
Listen, let me jump in here and say that I absolutely don't have any opposition to the idea that witnesses to what actually happened in Abbottabad were killed off, and it is hardly new and unique with Obama. I mean, I'm looking at my article on the Clinton body count, all the dead bodyguards that Bill Clinton had when he was doing what he was doing in Little Rock, which was tied in with all that gun and drug running, the Iran-Contra scandal. 4 of them were transferred to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They were killed with gunshots to the temple during the initial assault on the church at Waco. Alan G. Wicker was the boss of Clinton's Secret Service detail. And apparently just before the bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, Wicker was transferred to that Secret Service field office in the Murrah building. Now, we all know that BATF and FBI got an advance warning not to go to work that day. Wicker did not, and he died in that explosion. Let's see, Corporal Eric Fox, crewman from Marine One, the presidential helicopter shot in the head, declared a suicide. 5 Navy aviators, Clinton bodyguard escort, all died in a crash of an E-2C Hawkeye in Italy. And this was tied in with the carrier Roosevelt. Let's see, Staff Sergeant Brian Haney, Marine Sergeant Tim. So it goes on and on and on. And let's not forget the story about John P. O'Neill, who was the FBI's top expert supposedly on Osama bin Laden, who was a CIA asset. His code name was Tim Osman, and he was a U.S. asset during the U.S. going into Afghanistan and basically kicking the Soviet Union out of there. So if there was anybody who really knew whether bin Laden was the bad guy or not, or was actually a U.S. asset, and he was in a very important position, then all of a sudden he gets let go from the FBI, and a friend of a friend gets him this wonderful job as head of security at the World Trade Towers, in which he died.
Right.
So there's absolutely ample precedent for presidents and anybody else for that matter to simply get rid of people with incriminating information. I mean, look at all the mid-level banking and financial executives who are falling off of parking structures and committing suicide by shooting themselves 7 times with a nail gun. I mean, this kind of wet work is a constant feature of our present society.
I'll give you 2 more, but I also want to make the point. One is Ron Brown.
Yes.
Is another one. But with the SEAL team, even if you remember back when all these guys went down, it was the deadliest single day in 10 years or 12 years of even still in the Afghan war. And it happened to have all these guys that are trained at $5 million or $3 million a head, all in one big, soft target CH-47. And even their relatives were the dead SEALs' relatives were going, just what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
This is not the way things are done. And that was hushed up. But remember, the SEALs, the people who are active duty, not only is all the whistleblower the fear of whistleblowing, but they're also under the UCMJ, and they can be like imprisoned for a long, long time if they say anything. But their families were even beginning to say stuff, and to me it stinks of high heaven, and I don't really put it past Obama or any politician in this country covering up something as was a worldwide story that really would have affected their reelection. Had that came out as false back then, in July after Obama would have lost, if not been impeached.
Well, it was very, very close, and the Libya situation, I think, was an attempt to replay Carter's disaster in the desert and make Obama look good. That didn't work. And don't forget, after the Navy's accidental shoot-down of TWA 800, Bill Clinton signed an executive order revoking all whistleblower protection for all the military units involved in that. And there were some people who went public and then very quietly disappeared. So, there's absolutely no question that presidents will have people murdered to cover things up. I mean, that was the motive behind Vincent Foster's murder. Vincent Foster was in charge of preparing the documents for the Clinton Presidential Blind Trust, which we know from later testimony in the Whitewater investigation was incomplete. It was fraudulent. The Clintons still had control of much of their fortune, and Foster knew that if he signed those trust declarations and they were eventually exposed as false, he was the one who was going to go to jail. So he was getting ready to resign from the White House. In fact, he had an appointment with President Clinton the day following his supposed suicide, and 3 days after Foster was dead, the trust declarations were completed. Nobody actually knows by who. And so that was what was being covered up, the fact that the Clintons had kept control of much of their financial fortune in order to take advantage of inside information from the Oval Office.
Well, can I elaborate a little bit on Ron Brown? Because I may know some things that maybe aren't public knowledge.
Well, got to be real quick. We're coming up in a commercial break, and I'm holding another caller here who's been very, very patient. So real quick.
Okay, there are two wings of executive aircraft flown by the Air Force. I knew one of the guys who was in one of the wings. One wing goes to China and to the west. The other one goes to Europe and all that, and that's the way all these dignitaries fly. Not only that plane that Ron Brown went into the side of a mountain, planes go down in the Air Force, but how often do you hear the squadron commander for the one that handled the European operations, the guy committed suicide about 2 weeks later?
Yeah, that's another indication. I mean, we know that there was sabotage on the plane itself. We got to take a break for commercials. Peter, I got to let you go because I got to take some other phone calls. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And look, we know that the American people have been lied to constantly by the government, by corporations, by the media about very important things that resulted in a lot of people getting killed. Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Lusitania not carrying weapons. Pearl Harbor was a surprise, really honest, trust us. Our government has gotten by, our corporations, our entire ruling structure has gotten by with lies, fraud, and deception for so long, they don't know any other way to run a nation. And so common sense has to tell you that the first assumption you should have when you hear or see anything from the government and the corporate media is it's going to be a lie. The burden of proof is on them. George Carlin used to say one of his life rules is he never believed anything the government was saying, and that is a very wise piece of wisdom acquired through very, very painful experience. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Steve in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, it was obvious to me, Michael, that bin Laden had died of renal failure back in 2001. And that the government would keep him alive. They had to keep the boogeyman alive in order to keep going on with the agenda, the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. If the boogeyman it was revealed that the boogeyman had died, people would say, well, then why are you still there? Why are you pushing on? And why are you spending so much money? So they had to keep this guy alive. And, but the facts are out there. It's quite obvious. David Ray Griffin has quite an article spelling out all the evidence that, bin Laden was dead a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, we got his funeral notice. I mean, the fact of the matter is bin Laden had been in the American hospital in Riyadh in June of 2001, where the CIA visited with him to ascertain his medical condition. They didn't arrest him, even though they were already saying, oh, he did this, he did that, he blew up the embassy in Kenya and the rest of it. And at that time, basically the doctors were saying he had less than a year to live. He was simply not going to make it. And so the idea that he was still alive all the way until Abbottabad was medically impossible. Plus, of course, all of the subsequent phony bin Ladens, they kept getting younger and younger and, less gray hair and less gray hair. And I remember there was one of them. The makeup job was so bad you could actually see the little mesh for the fake beard. And I don't know where they're getting their people to do these fakes, but they're really not very good at what they do, whether it's the bin Laden makeup job or the phony pictures of the dead bin Laden. I guess they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for anybody who actually knows how to do anything like this. But, yeah, the government lies to us about everything. I was joking just yesterday. They don't dare tell the truth even once out of fear that we might learn to tell the difference.
Right.
So,
well, they just simply spin another lie for another lie. Do you know, it's interesting that they did everything in crime. They did everything wrong. They disposed of a body. They did everything. They told their little story. They disposed of a body, the evidence, and then they come up with their little story. But, I mean, we can go back to the many lies of this administration and prior administrations. I mean, just look at the Jessica Lynch hoax of how she was a hero and how they staged that whole thing. And that blew up in their face because she came out and told the truth. I mean, one after the other, one after the other.
Yeah, and who was that football player who went in?
Pat Tilden.
Pat Tilden, and it turned out he was shot in a friendly fire incident. And, and same thing. Every one of the BATF agents, the former Clinton bodyguards who were killed at Waco, were killed by their own people because we now know the Branch Davidians did not have any working firearms on the premises when the BATF raided. They just opened fire. They shot him in the crotch, and it went downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, one last parting phrase here. Basically, there are no coincidences, Michael. No coincidences. Everything is pre-planned and by design. And
let's not ignore screw-ups, because that does happen, and that's when they really have to start shooting from the hip and covering things up. The flight crew regaining control of Flight 93 was a goof. The general public joining at Benghazi, that was a goof. They do make these goofs, and it's in the scramble trying to cover up the goofs that the propaganda is most vulnerable.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Minus in Greece. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mr. Rivero.
Thank you. What's on your mind today?
I've been calling for a couple of things. We've talked together a couple of months ago, if you remember. A former AIG employee from Greece, I've called you, if you remember.
Yes, I remember.
Excellent. I'm calling regarding the situation in Macedonia, as you've been calling over and over again. First of all, the name of the sort of called state of Macedonia is Fyrom. Fyrom, former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia. It's been accredited by the United Nations back in 1993, if I'm not mistaken, as Fyrom. I'm calling because I live in Macedonia. I live in Thessaloniki.
Okay.
And Alexander the Great was speaking Greek, not Slavic.
Yes.
The name of the so-called state back in the 1940s is called Vardarska. Mr. Tito, Joseph Broz, as you very well aware of, made that statement back in the 1940s, early 50s. Anyway, regarding the whole situation on our planet, that's what I'm calling for, from 12 hours behind, or actually, it's 12 o'clock at night here, there it's like 12 o'clock noontime, right?
Well, we're coming up on 11 here in Oahu. We're coming up on 4 in the afternoon in Central Time, which is where our radio show is emanating from. But what's going on there? What are you seeing in front of your eyes?
Well, as I've told you 2 months ago, the Greek populace has been sold out again. Our very well Prime Minister and Presidents and everybody else, they have sold out again the Greek populace onto the ECB, onto the Federal Reserve, in order to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is the one you've been telling about for the last 10, 20, 30 years, I guess. Because if Greece breaks out of the ECB, of the European Central Bank, you're going to have a domino effect which is going to take care of the $1.4 quadrillion of derivatives.
Yes.
And this is going to take down the whole so-called Federal Reserve System. So maybe we should be getting prepared
Oh, I agree. Absolutely, we have to be prepared. They're not going to be able to hold this together much longer, even with all the deceptions and lies. And I still think that Greece actually failed to make that last payment, and everybody's sort of saying we can't publicize it, or all the derivatives holders are going to be trying to cash them in, even though Wall Street's rating agencies have already said they will never declare a default for Greece in order to protect those American banks.
I don't know if our listeners are aware of that Greece has no more money for paying all the money to the IMF and to the ECB. No more.
Yeah, they're absolutely broke
done.
there.
And by August, we have to pay 16.5 billion. Greece is going to be accredited by the ECB 7.1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, euros. I'm wondering how it's going to happen for 7 billion to cover up the 16.5 billion. It's impossible. So maybe, I'm guessing, by the end of June, early July, we're going to have a little bank holidays, it's called,
yes.
If I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
In Greece, while everybody's going to be beaching around, B-E-A-C, I'm talking about, you know,
yes.
all the beach, you know. Maybe we should be very well aware of what's happening, guys.
We have to be. We have to be.
Maybe it's going to be the trigger.
I think so. I think that's why they're rushing this agenda to ban all cash. They're openly training to put down riots here in the United States of America. It's going to come apart, very, very soon here. Anyway, Minus, thank you very much for the phone call. We have to let you go and take a commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to the international news. Now, there is supposed to be a 5-day ceasefire in Yemen in order to allow humanitarian aid to get in there unmolested. Unfortunately, earlier today, a Saudi airstrike hit a convoy. So already Saudi Arabia is basically in violation of their own ceasefire. This was supposedly their idea, but they're in there bombing things. Now, Iran has issued a warning. They are sending a cargo ship full of humanitarian aid. Anybody wants to inspect it, they can. Food, water, medical, whatever. And they've issued a warning. If anybody attacks that ship, it will be seen as an act of war. And I wish Iran had not made that statement, because that guarantees this ship will be attacked. Probably by Israel, which has a past history of attacking humanitarian aid ships in international waters. So whoever in the Iranian government made this statement, they basically taped a kick me sign on the back of their own nation. Now, the U.S. is talking about using military force to confront China in the South China Sea Islands dispute. Boy, I hate being right all the time. The U.S. needs a state of war with China in order to enforce their allies to stay away from the yuan. And they want a war with Russia to do the same thing with the ruble. That's what these wars are all about, maintaining dominance of the U.S. dollar in the global commerce. And the U.S. dollar is under severe strain. It's been overprinted. It's held up with fraud and corruption. The U.S. dollar is not backed by strong manufacturing. Nobody wants our agricultural products because of GMO. And that's why the world is moving away from the dollar toward the yuan and toward the ruble. And the U.S. has to stop that or collapse. And that's why they're trying to pick fights with Russia and China. The second reason they're trying to do that is they need the American people to be more forgiving of the U.S. government, and making war on these helpless little Middle Eastern nations isn't doing it, because we all understand this is the big bully United States government dropping all kinds of bombs and drones and cluster munitions on pretty much helpless, defenseless people. So the U.S. government needs a war with a peer nation. So they've got something to blame for the upcoming economic crash. They need a distraction, because if the U.S. economy implodes And they don't have somebody to blame on it, to blame it all on. We, the American people, are going to stand up and point the finger of blame where it honestly, richly deserves to go. The money junkies on Wall Street and their hired lackeys in Washington, D.C. They really messed up what used to be the greatest nation on earth in service to their greed, their addiction to money. And so now the U.S. is out there saying that they may deploy military force against China over the South China Sea Islands dispute. And here's something you need to keep in mind. The U.S. does not actually have a dog in that hunt. We don't claim any of those islands. None of those islands are considered U.S. territorial property. It's just a convenient excuse. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out there warning that this escalation against Russia and China are leading to a likely nuclear war because Russia and China won't accept U.S. hegemony. They're not going to go along with it. They've had half a century of U.S. dominance of the global economic system, and that's enough. And the White House is trying to arm twist other nations with these trade pacts to go back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, to allow the United States financial system to continue to siphon wealth off of other people's labor and products. And the holdouts obviously are going to be Russia and China, because the U.S. can go to these other smaller countries and say, sign this trade treaty or we'll find a reason to go in and overthrow your government and put in a government that will sign the treaty. And that's a credible threat, because these other governments have seen what the U.S. is doing in Iraq, in Tripoli, in Libya, did to Iran in 1953, did to Chile in 1973. The U.S. has a long track record of mucking about with other people's countries if they won't do as they're told. Now, the U.S. State Department has come out basically trying to refute Paul Craig Roberts' concerns. And remember, Paul Craig Roberts is a former White House official himself. So the State Department is out there saying, no, Ukraine's not going to lead to nuclear war. It could never possibly happen. And I know from talking to a lot of people that live near me that on Thanksgiving Day, 1941, nobody on this island thought they were going to be attacked by Japan. Now, NATO, supposedly to prevent a misunderstanding, has restarted the hotline between NATO and Moscow. But it may not be the friendly gesture that they thought it was, because NATO is starting to remove Russian diplomats from NATO headquarters. Don't want them in there looking at what's going on here. Now, a lot of people were talking about Kerry's meeting with Putin over in Russia, and it was announced ahead of time, and then it almost seemed to vanish from the corporate media. And actually, I had somebody write into me and say, what's going on? This was supposed to be a big deal, and all of a sudden, there's no mention of it. And I said, it looks to me like Kerry may have been handed his hat. He didn't get what he wanted. And the indications of that here are from a report we're getting where Kerry came out of the meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin, basically saying that the Minsk II agreement was the only way forward for Ukraine, and the U.S. will now caution Poroshenko against renewing military options. In other words, Kerry went in there trying to bluff Russia to back down, and Russia didn't. This is the first official U.S. endorsement of the Minsk agreement, which is humiliating for the United States since the Minsk agreement was negotiated without the United States being present. I think Kerry just blinked. Alrighty, we're going to grab a quick phone call before the top of the hour news here. Jeff in Minnesota, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, I called you today about the bumper music, but here, to build the brand, to build more listeners to the network, I want you for maybe a couple days, when you have your webcast on the top of the page, maybe right underneath you put call Mr. Droopball and get a page with the links to all your bumper music, and then when people like download it or play it, and they say, wow, corporations, Wall Street and the banks, that's cool. Where'd you get that?
Well, anybody who wants to listen to the bumper music can find it over at the webpage for the radio show, wrhradio.com. And, I'm glad that you like the music here, but I sort of need to get back to...
I couldn't find it. See, that's it. I couldn't find it. I went there and it, took me somewhere else, so maybe...
No, wrhradio.com, and, in fact, I'll just... wrhradio.com. And it comes right up. Well, it takes you to a subpage on my regular website, but halfway down the page it just says, listen to music from the What Really Happened radio show. It's just above the History Channel video from the Gold Conspiracy. Anyway, I need to let you go and get on back to the news here. Now, we're talking about the possibility of nuclear war, and we better start taking that possibility seriously. And there's a very interesting article over in the Daily Sheeple pointing out that America's nuclear arsenal, for the most part, is extremely vulnerable. Because when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. government scrapped plans to find ways to conceal their land-based missile launching facilities. And you can go into Google Earth and find those things. And obviously, those are going to be first strike targets if there is a nuclear exchange. So the reality is our nuclear arsenal is extremely vulnerable to a first strike. We could find ourselves without most of our nuclear weapons just at the point we're starting to fling them at other countries. And that this is over and above the damage caused by Jonathan Pollard, who stole our nuclear deterrent secrets, sold them to Israel. Israel turned around, traded them to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas. Anyway, we got to take a break for news. I think I'm supposed to be hearing the music. There it is. And we'll be right back after our news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Here we're going to move along. We got a lot of stuff to cover. All righty. So, up in Ukraine, Poroshenko is now talking about confining all of the ethnic Russians inside Ukraine in concentration camps. I mean, he's going full Hitler right now. And they passed all kinds of laws making it a crime to criticize the government. Concentration camps now, those poor Ukrainian people. And by the way, a large number of them are, in fact, ethnic Russians. It's going to be a sizable chunk of the population Poroshenko's going to put behind barbed wire. Now, getting on back to Macedonia, more and more articles are coming out saying that all of this trouble inside Macedonia is being created by outside forces by the West. And they're saying it's an ongoing product of Western intervention, NATO bombing of the region in the 1990s. They're pushing a concept called Greater Albania to try and destabilize the Balkans. And remember, the Balkans are the Balkans because a previous intervention broke up another country. Led to the word balkanization, taking a big country, turning into lots and lots of little countries. All righty, let's see. Apparently, Egypt's communication satellite, TV rebroadcast satellite, has dumped the Yemen TV channel. Hezbollah is saying this is basically piracy, trying to cut off the people of Yemen from their own friendly, supportive domestic media. So all they get now is what's being fed in for propaganda from the outside. Meanwhile, over in Afghanistan, heroin use plagues millions of the Afghani people, including children. Now remember, when the Taliban was in control of Afghanistan, opium production had been brought to an absolute standstill. If you were caught with a poppy, they'd take your hand off. Little dramatic, but it did work. As soon as the U.S. went in and kicked out the Taliban and put in their U.S. puppet ruler, El Presidente de Uno Cal, Hamid Karzai, the poppies were booming. And we have posted many times photographs of the opium poppy fields being guarded by Western troops and bags of the raw opium being transshipped by the military. And cheap heroin is flooding the United States. It's flooding Russia. They're not happy about that. And, of course, the people living around that area with easy access to the raw opium, they're becoming addicted. What a wonderful legacy for the Afghani people from the American invasion. Over in Great Britain, celebrating his election, and I use the term loosely, victory, because there are already several police investigations into massive electoral fraud. But Cameron is already out there talking about new laws reducing the freedom of speech of the British subject. And it is specifically targeting social media and the internet blogs. And basically, they've got this wide category, any speech for the purpose of overthrowing democracy is criminalized. And that is a very gray definition that could be applied to just about any criticism of the government. Look how tyrannical and dictatorial all of these nations under these private central banks are becoming. We're going to grab a couple more phone calls here. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Going back to Ukraine and this visit to Sochi, Russia by Victoria Nudelman and John Kerry.
Yes.
I mean, the backtracking of these views on Ukraine by Kerry just seems to be amazing. I mean, the deal at Minsk was organized without the U.S. Now it seems that Kerry may be jumping on board that.
Well, I think what happened is, Kerry went over there to bluff Russia into backing off and allowing Poroshenko to reconquer the Donbass, the other one, and possibly even Crimea itself. Lugansk. And basically, Putin wouldn't back down. Because, first of all, Putin isn't doing anything wrong, hasn't done anything wrong. And I'm sure Putin at this point is a little irritated at this tsunami of lies, of bovine excrement being poured out of Washington, D.C. with their bovine excrement howitzer, and he's a little tired of it, and he's not going to back down.
Well, that is the view of, I don't know whether you read the site, the Vineyard of Saker's site?
Yes.
And Sputnik News, and they detail everything. And I think one of the main points is that both these sides are saying is that, well, Putin and Lavrov just aren't going to move. They're just not going to accept it. And I think the actual structure of these sanctions is doing so much damage to Europe that it's driving a big wedge between America and Europe, and is actually affecting the alliance of NATO.
It actually is. I mean, this is a classic case of hoisting with your own petard, both with the sanctions against Russia and the sanctions against Iran, because Russia and Iran just went off and did business with the rest of the world that doesn't care what the U.S. wants or doesn't want. And the economic damage has been far greater to Europe, the United States, Canada, South America, than it has been to Russia itself. Russia's economy has rebounded from the temporary suppression. Now that oil prices are going back up, Russia's got lots of oil and gas to export. They're going to come out of this doing really well. The political damage to the United States, though, as you say, is tremendous. And I think this is going to come back to haunt the U.S. when they try and get these trade pacts signed by the other countries. And as you heard on the SRN News Break, the Democrats in Congress just did an about-face. Yesterday, they refused to vote through fast-track authority. Today, they have a deal, and I have to wonder how many of them got late-night phone calls from the NSA replaying their own phone calls to Fifi's phone fantasies with threats to forward same to wives and possibly husbands, to get this sudden reversal of the Congress. Somebody twisted some arms or other bodily parts somewhere.
Well, I'm looking at this situation, and the State Department seems to have been staffed by the clowns from Fred Carno's circus.
It's a tough job there to stand there with your hair on fire and insist you can't smell any smoke. And I don't know what they're paying these State Department spokes slugs, but it's not enough for that job, I got to tell you.
Well, and looking at the information coming from Sputnik News, from Vineyard of Saker, from Paul Craig Roberts, the whole thing is a disaster.
It's fallen apart. It's falling apart. The danger is that we have a government that is institutionally incapable of admitting error or changing course. We saw that with Obamacare. They're still out there pushing it, even though it's a disaster. They're still out there pushing human-caused global warming, even though we still have snow on the ground mere weeks from summer. And for the war policy, they're not going to change course. They're going to keep on going, and they're going to destroy our country. They can't win conventionally against Russia and China, and that they're going to go nuclear. But this apparently is preferable to having to stand up in there and say, yeah, we were wrong to start this. We lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons. And they can't do it. They absolutely are psychologically incapable of doing that. And that is a real danger, that they would actually prefer to set off a nuclear war than have to admit publicly that they've made a mistake in all of this policy.
Well, I'm looking at the statement, I think it was 1999, end of 1999, and bin Laden, he said, of this war coming in Afghanistan, we don't want to win this war. All we need to do is keep America fighting until they go bankrupt.
Yeah, it's not just bin Laden. I mean, yeah, same thing. Anyway, listen, John, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I take this next phone call, I just had an article showed up in TASS where they're confirming that this meeting between John Kerry, Victoria Nuland, other members of the U.S. State Department, with Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin did not go very well for the United States of America. And they're basically saying the U.S. is not even discussing Crimea anymore. That's always been a big talking point for the United States. Russia must give Crimea back. Recognizing, of course, Russia didn't take Crimea to begin with. Following the U.S.-backed coup d'etat in Kiev, Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine, which they are allowed to do under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They then voted to ask if they could merge with Russia, and Russia said yes. That's what happened. Russia didn't steal Crimea, they didn't invade Crimea, and apparently Crimea was not even on the table with the discussions. Kerry has come out of these meetings saying the United States and European Union will start lifting the Russian sanctions as soon as the Minsk agreements are implemented in full. In other words, they're going to calm things down. The independent Eastern Ukrainian republics are going to remain independent, and the U.S. and EU will lift the sanctions, which are causing far more harm to the U.S. and EU than to Russia. Putin is a chess player. He is so far ahead of anybody in the U.S. federal government because they're all raised playing poker and hearts, and it's all about the bluff and pounding on the chest, and that really doesn't work against a master chess player. And Kerry is playing out of his depth. Putin is former KGB. He spent his life inside Russia's political system. Kerry basically married into the ketchup fortune and decided, hey, I think I'll be a politician. And he's really no more qualified to be Secretary of State than Hillary Clinton was. It's just a position they like to occupy to look good for the eventual run for the White House, which tells us Kerry's going to try again. Not this year, not next year rather, but probably in, who knows, somewhere down the road. All right, let's grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You say tomato, I say tomato. You say potato, I say potato.
Oh, let's just call the whole thing off.
Hey, Mike, you know what? Are those genetically modified organisms?
I don't know. We've got all these test fields here in Oahu where they're growing all these GMO test plants. You walk by and the plants are going, feed me.
You think John Kerry, they should have gave him turnips and potatoes because John Kerry probably has unlimited supply of tomatoes.
Yeah, probably he does. And, I would not be surprised if the Heinz ketchup people are lining up for the GMO crops because it's all driven by money and greed and a desire for monopolistic control over the food supply. That's what's really going on behind all of this GMO nonsense. They don't want the human race to have access to naturally grown food that they can grow on their own property. They want us hopelessly dependent on this chemical pap coming out of the factories and the chemistry labs in the supermarket, because dependency is slavery. They're trying to enslave the human population to the money junkies. They're bringing back feudalism is what they're trying to do here, where the money junkies own all the land and the land owns the people. That's the model of feudalism.
These people are, this is just a sad-looking, Kerry and Noodleman going over there, and it's just a sad excuse. I mean, Putin ain't going to give Crimea back. I mean, you can't even ask that. That's just come on.
Well, apparently they went over there to ask it, and, they're riding high on their track record of overthrowing other governments. But if you look at all the times since the end of World War II where the United States has overthrown governments of other countries, they're only batting about 500. They only succeed half the time, and I don't think at this point we can call Kiev a success. And we're still going to see what's going on. They're trying to do it in Macedonia. But all of these conquered provinces are now awake to what is really going on inside their country. It's not, a color revolution that put out an old corrupt government and put a new corrupt government in. They recognize it is outside forces, the United States, that kicked out their elected government and put in a new tyrant. And so they're basically saying, we're going to kick the U.S. puppets out. Iran did that in 1979. Cuba did it all the way back with Castro. Libya's trying to do the same. Yemen's trying to do the same. This old model of U.S. covert foreign conquest is breaking down. It doesn't work any longer. And Ukraine set a whole new standard where the U.S. went in, they overthrew the elected government in Kiev, they put in Poroshenko, and the first thing that happens, the rest of Ukraine says, hey, we have the right under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to vote ourselves out of this country and set up a new one. That's what Crimea did. That's what Lugansk and Donetsk are doing. And basically, the new model is going to be the U.S. goes in and conquers a capital city, and the rest of the country fragments away from it. And so all the U.S. is left with, all the U.S. puppet is left with is, maybe 40 or 50 square miles around the capital city, and they can't make money off of that.
Well, this is all about expanding the debt, and they hit a brick wall. They're not going to take Russia and the Chinese. It's just, they're just uncommon. There's no common sense there. So they hit a brick wall because, they got to expand the debt, and they got to do it quick.
They got to expand the debt, but the problem is the rest of the world is breaking away from this debt slavery system, and they're starting to go with these alternative systems, whether it's the BRICS, the Central Asian Investment Bank, all of these other parallel systems are being set up, and they're far more attractive because they are siphoning much less of other people's commerce off for the owners. They're setting up a global financial system that serves the people of the globe rather than these private central bankers. And the money junkies are in an absolute panic now. They don't know how to stop this.
Is that story true with Putin asking Greece to join the BRICS group?
I'm still trying to find that out. It was originally sourced to Bloomberg, but I can't find it at Bloomberg, but I think it's very telling. Nobody's come out to deny the story, whether from Bloomberg or anybody else. It would make perfect sense for Russia to invite Greece to join BRICS. It would be the smart move to do for Russia to invite them and for Greece to accept, because Greece is out of money. They're going to be absolutely flat, siphoned dry within the next month.
It'd be Brigigigits. They'll have the whole alphabet in there by the end.
Well, I don't know if they'll change the acronym. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. It's like the P5+1. It's going to be BRICS +1. And you need to understand, BRICS it's not just those nations. I mean, there are 80 countries already signed on to BRICS. And so it would not be without precedent for Greece to say, yeah, we're going to sign on there. We're going to let you guys be our bank and our access point to global commerce. And they can't stop it.
It's death of 1,000 paper cuts. You got BRICS, the Shanghai Co-op, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, AIIB. It's just death of 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, it is. And the only thing the U.S. can think of doing is to threaten the world with nuclear war if they don't go back to letting the U.S. be in charge of global commerce. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before I take this next phone call, story I'm looking at that just came out over in Washington's blog. Former White House official Dr. Philippa Malmgren, former presidential advisor, basically was quoted last December as saying that the United States is already at war with China and Russia. And this is based on comments from senior people in the U.S. defense establishment. And their view is we're already in a nose-to-nose confrontation with China and Russia. It is being conducted primarily through cyberspace rather than through traditional conventional weapons. But a cyber war can very easily mutate into an all-out real weapons that go boom war. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Lenny in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
Listen, I would like to comment about the interview with Paul Craig Roberts I saw this morning on RT. And in his interview, he spoke of how the U.S., Victoria Nuland, John Kerry, and the rest of the company jumped up and ran over to talk with Russia all of a sudden. Now, he says it could be a ploy, but he thinks one of the reasons that they went over all of a sudden is because of the V-Day parade. And he poignantly spoke about how the president of China was sitting at Putin's right side.
Yes.
And if you watch that parade, and the first time ever, the Chinese marched in the V-Day parade, and they were wearing the St. George ribbons. And I'm telling you, Mike, they mean business. I don't think they're here to back down, and I think that they see it from their point of view. They're the last line of defense in the New World Order, just totally steamrolling over humanity.
That's exactly right there. I mean, the V-Day parade arrangements sent a message. Russia and China are a single bloc that the U.S. is going to have to deal with. They're not going to be able to pick off first China and then Russia and do it piecemeal. And especially given the current state of U.S. military hardware, which is hideously expensive and absolute junk. I mean, they're already starting to put the F-22s in museums because they're not good for anything else. Somebody inside Washington, D.C. has to wake up and realize, saying, guys, if we get this war with Russia-China going, we cannot possibly win, even with nuclear weapons.
That's right, and while the parade was going on, it was said that Kim Jong-un would attend the parade, then he said he couldn't, but while the parade was going on, he managed to show that he could fire a missile from one of his submarines, and South Korea confirmed it.
Well, you need to understand something. If you go back to General Wesley Clark, who blew the whistle on this game plan of, conquering all the resource-rich areas of the world, bring them back under the petrodollar, it was all supposed to be completed by 2008. And obviously it is not. They still have not even started to go into Iran. And meanwhile, all these other countries who have seen what the U.S. is doing, who knew what that plan was, they've had time to bring their military up to par. And these other countries, when they spend $1 on weapon systems, they get the best weapon they can for the money. Here in the United States of America, the military-industrial complex is all about getting as much money as you can, for these weapons, and then they rig the tests to make them look like they're going to work, and when they actually go out there in the field, they're an absolute disaster. Our defense establishment, our Pentagon, are going to be responsible for the death of tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers, sailors, and air people by sending them out to try and fight a war with this junk. And that's absolutely the reality here, because they're all about the money and the power and the influence.
And I think you're 100% right. I don't think they care as long as the industrial complex gets to get their make on it. I don't think they really care about America and humanity at all. I really don't.
No, they really don't here. And you need to go back and read the biography of Harry Truman, because what made him so popular when he was in the Senate was that he took on the military contractors who were getting huge amounts of money and delivering nothing at all. And I remember there was this one famous case where he was looking at all the millions of dollars had gone to this company to supposedly build a weapons factory, and he actually went out to where the factory was supposed to be and found an empty lot. And,
And he did warn Kennedy in one of his last speeches, did he not?
I think you're talking about Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex.
I'm sorry. Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
and another one, the Eisenhower's Cross of Iron speech, and what is so interesting about all of that, Eisenhower had actually been in a war. He'd been in combat. He saw for himself what war will do, and when he was president, he was probably one of the most anti-war presidents we've ever had, because he knows what it's really all about, as opposed to these country club nepots that we have passing the White House back and forth to brothers and sons and wives and daughters who've never actually had to be in a real war. That's something that happens way far away, and it's not our kids and it's not our money, so let's go and have a lot of fun. Seems to be the attitude we're getting out of Washington, D.C. these days.
All right, thanks, Mike. That's all I want to say.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to switch over to Scott in Texas. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I had a couple of things I was going to touch base on. One was I just really wanted to try to figure out how we, the people, can really just wake, people up. It's getting to the point where it's coming to a head. Everybody knows what's going on. The people of the world see this going on, and it just makes me violent, angry, and you want to lash out, but you can't.
No, that's a bad move to initiate violence. The government would love to see that happen. The very best thing every single one of you can be doing right now is to speak up about what's going on, and you'll serve two purposes. Everybody understands at a gut level something's gone horribly wrong with this country, but they don't have all the fine details. You do, so go ahead and share them with the other people. The other reason to have the courage to speak out is you will give everybody around you the courage to speak out. Because one of the big illusions the U.S. government was trying to put out there is that people like you and I who know what's going on and question the official U.S. government story about whatever are a tiny, fringy minority. We're social misfits. No real American wants to, associate with us. And so you have crowds of people who all know something's going wrong, and they're staying silent because they've been convinced they're the only person in the room who's got these doubts. And I've seen this happen time and time again. You start making a comment, you speak out, and you get this reaction, wow, I thought I was the only person who thought blah. And, at this point, we are at the knee of the curve, where the American people are finding it not only acceptable to doubt the government and the legitimacy of wars, they're now finding it socially acceptable to speak out. And once you cross that line, there's no going back, unless you're going to do something like France is already out there signing criminal penalties for anybody who has a pro-Palestine rally. I mean, that's how desperate they are. And remember, we've got this coffee mug that we sell over at our online store. Has on the front of it, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. France just crossed that line. So did the Harper government. So is David Cameron. They're all revealing themselves to their own population for what they really are. Tyrants, dictators, autocrats looking to find absolutism as the new model of government of their nations. Because they understand they can't pursue the war agenda any further as long as anybody in their country has the freedom to stand up and say, this is a really stupid idea.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I do.
So get out there and speak out. Share with your friends, your coworkers, students on your social media. Just get on out there and say, the government has lied to you about Spanish mines in Havana Harbor. They lied about the Lusitania. They've lied about Benghazi. They've lied about the raid that got bin Laden. Just use all the exposed government's lies against the lying government, and we will move this forward here. Scott, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the Vatican has now officially recognized the state of Palestine. They have signed a treaty with the government of Palestine, adding the weight of the Holy See to the United Nations General Assembly, which recognizes the Palestinian state. And Netanyahu's already out there screaming, you anti-Semites, you Jew haters, and probably I think we can expect the obeisant corporate media to start dragging up the history of Papal Nuncio Eugenio Pacelli, who was, on behalf of the Catholic Church, helped bring about the fall of the Weimar Republic. and the rise of Adolf Hitler. Then when he was done helping Hitler to power, Pacelli went on down to Spain and helped Francisco Franco seize power down there. And Francisco actually flew the flag of the Vatican over his official palace in recognition of that. And Pacelli eventually became Pope Pius XII, and the Catholic Church has been trying to live that down ever since. And I'll bet you it's going to get dragged up now that the Vatican has recognized the state of Palestine. California Senate mulling new attempt to squash Palestine solidarity. They're looking at a Senate resolution, 35, basically urging all of the University of California campuses to condemn, quote, all forms of anti-Semitism, end quote, including those justified as expression of disapproval or frustrations over political events in the Middle East. In other words, the California Senate has now fallen out of that bandwagon that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. No, it isn't. It's criticism of Israel. Anti-Semitism is hating the Semites just because they're Semites, which, by the way, also includes the Arabs, I might add. It is not Israel's religion that is the problem. It is not their ethnicity. It is their behavior. And trying to deflect criticism of Israel by calling it anti-Semitic is like trying to defend Hitler and the Nazis by saying, oh, you're just being anti-German. You're being anti-Aryan. Hitler didn't do anything wrong. You just hate the German people. And it's silly, and we laugh at it, but that's exactly what this policy is. A high-profile group of former European political leaders and diplomats is saying that the European Union needs to reassess their policy regarding Israel and Palestine, recognize Palestine, and say it's time for Israel to be held to account for all of their crimes against humanity. They're absolutely right. The backlash against Israel is growing. When it breaks through, I hope only the guilty are made to pay for it. Because as we respect human rights, those who violate human rights ought to be punished. But on that same level of respecting human rights, we have to be vigilant that the innocent are protected from harm. Unlike the police in Baltimore and Ferguson and the rest of these other places. Meanwhile, U.S. senators are pushing for a strategic U.S.-Israel energy alliance, and I'll save you having to read the whole thing. Basically, the way it works, Israel steals gas from their neighboring countries to sell to the United States, and the U.S. sends your kids to protect Israel when those other neighboring nations get annoyed. That's basically what that is. All right, we got to talk about the economy. We're almost to hour number 3. I'm way behind on the talking points here. HSBC chief economist Stephen King, not the author of the books, is out there saying the world economy faces a titanic problem. And he's talking about global depression. He's absolutely right. That is the end result of the model of private central banking, which produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt crashes the entire system. Now, in past centuries, when a nation that was enslaved to a private central bank collapsed, the other nations with private central banks would swoop in, they'd buy up all the assets for pennies on the dollar, and restart the enslavement system all over again. But because of globalism, all of these private central banks are now linked to each other. When one goes down, they will all go down. It'll be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the people of planet Earth to free themselves from the tyranny of these private central banks. The essence of these banks, the core of their business, is to keep us all, whether we're individuals or nations, slave to their debt. Rule by compound interest, and it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former systems, it works only so long as the people are brainwashed into believing this is how life is supposed to be. Now, over in Greece, Tsipras is calling an emergency meeting. They're basically out of money. Greece had to dip into the emergency account to repay the IMF debt. They're basically out of money. They're saying there's going to be absolutely no money in circulation in just a couple of weeks. And they don't know what to do about it. Now, Denmark is leading the way, moving to a totally cashless society. Denmark is going to stop producing coins and paper notes. All of the money in the country will be inside the banks, and you will move it from bank to bank with a little plastic card. means no more hold-up of convenience stores, also means no more runs on the banks. And the banks can use your money, even though it supposedly is yours, to play their financial games. They've taken away control of the value of your money. Now they want to take away control of the money itself. It's all of our money. We just deign to let you use it for a small fee. Now, earlier today, the credit rating of Chicago was reduced to junk status by the ratings agencies. And this is bad news for Chicago because Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who probably is already calling for a recount from that last election, is trying to refinance nearly $1 billion in floating rate debt into fixed rate notes. He's having to borrow another $200 million to pay off the related swaps. And now the interest is going to be far higher on all of that. Plus, the creditors are allowed to call for early payment of the money Chicago owes them on the basis of this credit rating write-down. Chicago may be in bankruptcy very, very soon indeed. Now, the retail sales numbers are not looking good. Hundreds of mall stores have announced they're closing. April sales were flat. At this rate, 50% of all U.S. malls will be closed in the next 15 years. Consumer spending did not go up at all in the month of April. So much for blaming the cold winter for the first quarter numbers. Remember, that was the excuse. Oh, consumer spending is down, but that's because they were cold and staying at home. Actually, when it's cold, you buy things like snow tires, blankets, space heaters, and so forth and so on. You certainly buy a lot more oil and gas and electricity to keep your home heated. But the sales number, the consumer sales figures for April tell us, no, it wasn't the cold. We're out of money. The American people have been sucked dry by the money junkies. We don't have money with which to go into the stores and buy things. The banks are happy to loan us money to buy things, but we don't want to do that because unlike the government and the bankers, we want to know we have the ability to repay the loans before we borrow that money. And no, we don't have that. The American people have zero confidence that the economy is going to recover. All righty. Now, getting on to politics here, Scott Walker is going to meet with Netanyahu while he's over there in Israel, getting Netanyahu's permission to run for the American presidency. A lot of people are reacting to Jeb Bush's comment about, yes, he would have invaded Iraq on the basis of that lie about nuclear weapons. And they're saying, did Jeb Bush himself just commit a war crime in trying to justify the Iraq war? Ted Cruz is out there saying, Jeb Bush put his foot in it. Of course, Iraq was a mistake. And now Jeb Bush's campaign is saying Jeb Bush misunderstood the question about Iraq. And so you shouldn't listen to what he said. It's absolutely meaningless here. It's no longer operative. Now, as you heard on the SRN News Break, there's another bill in Congress regarding abortion, right to life here. Melissa Harris Perry is out there with a comment, abortion is like removing a cancer. So, the pro-abortion Democrats are comparing unborn babies to cancerous tumors, just so you know how much they respect human life. Okay? Now, I don't like the idea of abortion. I don't think it should be used as retroactive birth control, but I recognize there are times when it is necessary and justified. But to call unborn babies a cancer, to dehumanize them like that, that is a little sick. We got to take a break for our news. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3 here, and we've got a lot of stuff to get through here. Story just got posted to whatreallyhappened.com. It's originating from BuzzFeed. Apparently, Ukraine's President Poroshenko has named Senator John McCain as a part-time advisor to Poroshenko, which sounds really good, but there's a couple of problems. Poroshenko didn't notify McCain ahead of time he was going to make this announcement, which means McCain was not able to get clearance from the Senate, because you're not supposed to moonlight when you're in the United States Congress. They pay you enough where you don't need to moonlight over there. And this firmly put Senator John McCain in violation of the Logan Act. So book him, Dano. Just haul him off there. All righty, getting on back to more of the news here. Interesting article over at Metro West Daily News, where they're saying there are now doubts about the Islamic State's claim in the Texas attack. And basically, they're talking about people who were looking into this attempted shooting in Garland, Texas, are saying, well, you know, ISIS has a history of asserting involvement in attacks in which it actually had no connection. And there needs to be a correction. ISIS did not claim credit for Garland, Texas. Rita Katz's Site Intelligence Group claimed ISIS took credit for it. And Site Intelligence Group is constantly out there saying ISIS did this, Muslims did that, Arabs did that. We found it on these jihadi websites around the world without ever actually showing us the jihadi websites. And so that attack that false flag is already falling apart, right? We live in an age where the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer, which is why I have one here sitting right on my desk. And every time somebody in the government opens their mouth, I flip that thing over here. Now, a little bit of good news over in Baltimore. The state attorney, Marilyn Mosby, has now dropped all charges against everybody who was arrested for violating the curfew during the recent protests over the Freddie Gray killing. So they're just trying to back off from this thing and let everything kind of calm down over there, which would be kind of nice. But the police are not off the hook just yet. Horrible, horrible story coming out of INFOWARS, and it has to do with a couple over in St. Louis County, Janet and Donald Akers, and they were in their car driving on the way to the funeral for her mother. Okay, they're already emotional. So they're going through an intersection, and a large unmarked black truck came in from the side. And so this lady, Janet, honks the horn to say, hey, we're over here, don't hit us. The truck gets behind them, follows them, honking the horn, honking the horn, honking the horn. So Janet pulls the car over, her car, over to the curb to let the truck go around and just get away from the situation. The truck stops, guy gets out with a gun, pistol whips the man, Donald Akers, breaks his nose, breaks his teeth. Janet's trying to fight him off. The man hits her as well. Turns out it's an off-duty police officer. And now this couple, they're concerned. They're afraid of police retaliation because they've gone public with the story. The local police department is refusing to release the identity of the officer that attacked them, saying it's an ongoing investigation and we may have charges for the couple. We'll see what's going to happen with that. And just so that you know, this couple, Janet and Donald Akers, are white. This is not another case of white police officers attacking black people. It's an elderly white couple on their way to a funeral that were attacked by this off-duty cop. And they're reporting that when the other police showed up in response to the 911 calls, they were just laughing and joking with this off-duty cop. Oh, it's just horrendously funny here. All righty. Now then, a judge in Washington, federal judge, U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson, is saying that laptops are not the same thing as a handbag and may not be searched without a warrant. The border search doctrine has limits on electronic devices, is her ruling. Okay? Now, the U.S. government is starting to rely more and more on what is called the third-party doctrine, which is that if your property, meaning your information, passes through a third party, you lose your right to privacy, your expectation of privacy. Now, this is a very flimsy argument because Fourth Amendment rights are presumed, have been declared, ruled by the Supreme Court to apply to postal mail, which goes through a third party. You put a stamp on the envelope, you put it in the mailbox, it is now under the control of the United States Postal Service until it is delivered to the recipient. And yet that is considered protected by the Fourth Amendment. So it's a flimsy idea, but more and more they're saying, look, if your information is going through a third party, we do not need a warrant to acquire it. And they're using that to justify acquisition of your location data from your cell phone, because that is the property of the cell phone company. And the obvious implication here is that if you are storing any of your data on the cloud is considered third party. They can go through it without a warrant, which is why I tend not to use the cloud at all. And the fact of the matter is, even if there are laws protecting your privacy, the government won't comply. They never have. They think they're above the law. We serve a higher purpose, which is perpetuating our own wealth and power and glory and taking care of Wall Street and Israel. And because of that, we don't have to follow the Bill of Rights. It's 200 and some odd years old. It's a blankety-blank piece of paper. Now, there's a very interesting story that came out of Truthdig called A Nation of Snitches. And it's talking about this constant campaign that we're seeing from the Department of Homeland Security. If you see something, say something. They're trying to turn us into a nation of people who are informants on our friends and neighbors. The Nazis did exactly the same thing to the German people. Be a snitch for the government. Okay? And it is demoralizing for a society and a civilization. And the goal of that is to try and scare the population into being silent, because you don't know if the person you're talking to is a government snitch. And that's the real goal here. They're not going to get actionable intelligence from all these phone calls coming in saying, oh, my neighbor's throwing crabgrass seeds on my lawn at night. It's to scare us into being silent. Not working, but that's the thinking behind it. And every time I see one of those see something, say something signs, I remember all the way back in 1994 when I did see something. The evidence of fraud in the Vincent Foster murder case in the FBI's own paperwork. And I did try to say something. Hey, there's a murder here made to look like a suicide, which ended with my career in Hollywood being destroyed, my life threatened, my wife and I being harassed for all these years. See, what they don't have in that see something, say something sign is a little asterisk and down below saying, this doesn't apply if the person you're watching is a high-ranking politician or a banker or somebody like that. See something, say something against each other, but don't you dare say anything about, what the president is doing, what the Clintons are doing. Oh, no, it doesn't apply. The rules don't apply to them at all whatsoever. All righty, let's see. U.S. is going to spend $2 million on attorneys for illegal alien minors. We're paying for these kids to be brought in, housed, fed, taken care of, educated. Now we're paying for their lawyers. Do you realize these illegal aliens are getting a better deal from the federal government than legal, born in this country, American citizens? I think that is a little pathological. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm just going to go ahead and take this phone call here from Eric in California. Aloha, Eric. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I had two questions. One was just a computer question, kind of a boring thing. I just wanted your advice on products, I guess, for, like, if you know about, like, AdBlock Plus, and one is called Ghostery, Little Snitch, and NoScript, if any of those are good for, like, a Mac computer.
There's a lot of products out there. Some are good. You're going to have to look at Consumer Reports, because I don't have a Mac. I haven't had one for a lot of years. I work on Windows and Linux primarily, and so you're going to have to do your own homework on that one. Okay, so.
Okay, and the other thing I was calling about, I guess, I didn't hear the earlier in the show, I don't know if you covered this, but I was wondering with the Kerry thing going over to Russia, the timing, it seems like, probably the U.S. is worried with, Russia and China getting closer. But I haven't seen the news yet today, so I'm a little behind. But yesterday I saw that Kerry wanted to discourage them from delivering the S-300 rockets to Iran. And also he claimed that he had no idea about Poroshenko claiming to want to try to retake the Donetsk airport, which I find very hard to believe. So even though it looks kind of good, I'm kind of skeptical that this is just another ploy,
I would respectfully disagree with you, because at this point, Poroshenko has turned into the loose cannon on the deck. This stunt that he just pulled with John McCain, naming him a special advisor to the president of Ukraine, without even letting McCain know it was going to happen, so that McCain could, if he was interested in accepting the honor, clear it with the Senate. And so at this point, I would say Poroshenko, he either needs to be taking more antidepressants or he's already taking way too many, because his thought processes are definitely chaotic. And I think that, yes, some of his recent statements did catch the State Department off guard. They don't know what's going on over there. I think Kerry went over there, yes, trying to talk Russia into canceling the S-300 to Iran, but after the way the U.S. blocked France from delivering the Mistral ships to Russia, they were never going to get any traction with that one. I think the primary purpose of the visit was to try and bluff Russia into sitting back while Poroshenko recaptures the eastern Ukrainian republics, and Putin wasn't going to back down. And basically, yeah, I think Kerry got handed his hat on this one.
And what do you think about the whole Poroshenko thing? I mean, at first it seemed like it was really Yatsenyuk that was kind of in charge, kind of like the whole Bush-Cheney thing, where Cheney was really in charge. And it seemed like Washington was kind of shifting more behind Poroshenko, but, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. But as you said now, you think he's kind of going off the deep end here. What do you see as it's playing out, and what do you think Yatsenyuk's, role is in all this? They're looking for corruption and stuff, so you would think if Washington was behind them, they'd kind of block that.
Whoever's calling the shots in Kiev, they're not thinking clearly. It's not cohesive. There's no consistent thread of logic or policy behind it. I think they're in thrash mode. Regardless of who's actually calling the shots, they're in thrash mode. They're unpredictable, unreliable. I would not be at all surprised to see either a coup by Ukraine's own military against the leadership. We've been hearing rumors about that for a long time. Or the U.S. may go in, stage an assassination of Poroshenko to try and get somebody a little more stable in there, and of course blame the Eastern Ukrainian republics or even Putin for the assassination. But at this point, the situation is definitely in utter chaos over there, and Kerry is earning his catch-up with this job right now.
Yeah. It seems like Macedonia, again, I haven't seen today, get a little time today, but it seems like they're trying to do the same thing there. I mean, I remember maybe like a month ago or so there was an article, I forget what it was, but we're talking about there's starting to be some tension with the Albanians, and
yeah, we were talking about that. We were talking about that earlier, and I think it's extraordinarily reckless for the U.S. to start another one of these covert overthrows with Ukraine breaking down and calling attention to the aftermath of covert U.S. overthrows. And I think the fact that they went ahead with Macedonia betrays a high degree of desperation and panic inside the Beltway, where they're beginning to understand this whole program could fall apart on them at any moment, and they're just putting pedal to the metal, trying to accomplish as much as they can. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to happen there. Anyway, listen, Eric, I got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Wes in Idaho. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Michael, you have no problem with the Jewish religion. The Talmud says, Tob Shibi Goyim Harag every...
Okay, Wes, we've had this discussion before. I mean, the Talmud is hardly unique in very offensive things that it says. The Old Testament has a lot of that. Most religious texts, if you go into them, at some point they say, we're favored by the imaginary playmates in the sky, and that gives us a right to go out and burn the witches, torture the heretics, slap Galileo around, and so forth and so on here. I don't have a problem with the Jewish religion. I don't really have a problem with people's individual religious beliefs. I do have a problem with religion used as a tool of enslavement to justify wars and aggression. I do have a serious, serious problem with that. But again, during my first marriage, my first wife was Jewish, and, we had a Star of David on the Christmas tree, and I was as tolerant of her beliefs as I am of Claire's today. I'm really not all that upset about people's individuals' religions. The issue for Israel remains its behavior as a government, as leaders. That is the problem, not the Jewish religion. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. I got a bunch of stuff that I need to get onto here. Now then, before we run out of time, I want to jump ahead to human-caused global warming, because they're out there. And by the way, we're going to shut down the phones for the rest of the show because I got a bunch of stuff I need to get through here. There is currently a frost advisory in effect tonight in Detroit and across Wisconsin. We are just weeks away from the official start of summer. They're getting frost warnings in the American heartland here. Now, so far, the month of May has seen all-time records for snowfall broken all across the globe. Snow records broken on the slopes of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains range in southern Colorado. Let's see, more broken in the Crestone Baca weather station. It's got a huge list of these things. It is still snowing. It is setting snow records. Mid-May snow rain could put damper on inland races. All of these events they have for spring and summer had to be put on hold because they're dealing with the snow. More about human-caused global warming when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about human-caused global warming. There are frost warnings out tonight for all across Wisconsin, Detroit, that whole center part of the country. It is cold. This is the middle of May. We're seeing articles saying snow in May? I mean, come on. And by the way, down under in Australia, they're already seeing an early onset of their winter. It's all over the globe here. More snow heading for San Diego. Yes, up in the mountains. And by the way, the carbon Nazis are responding to all these stories by saying, well, it's up in the mountains. It's a high altitude. They get snow there all the time. Really? Back in 2000, you guys were saying snow and ice was a thing of the past. Oh, well, they didn't know what they were talking about. We have much better computer models today, and you should just take our word, blah, 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 blah. Amgen Tour's Big Bear Lake event threatened by snow. We've talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I'm going to hit it again. The longest continuously occupied Antarctic research station is located in Mawson. It is at the edge of a harbor, which normally during the southern hemisphere summer, which is just now ending, will be clear of ice, allowing cargo ships to go in there and drop off supplies, people, for the research that's going on there. The last 3 seasons have seen less and less open water in the harbor. In fact, one year there was no open water at all. And they had to ferry in all of the supplies by helicopter, which is very, very expensive. Remember last year when that research ship went down there to try and get film and video of the melting Antarctic ice and got trapped? So now they're talking about they're going to have to move the Mawson base closer to where the ice is. And they're still out there trying to say, well, you know, we don't know why the ice in Antarctica is growing because, you know, all of these research scientists who are paid to tell us the world is getting warmer are telling us the world is getting warmer, including those southern oceans. Somebody came in and said, oh, you know, the oceans are much warmer and that's why there's more moisture in the air. Okay, well, if the oceans are warm enough for all that evaporation, how does it get cold enough for the ice to form? Regardless of how much moisture is in the air, you have to have below freezing temperatures for the ice to form. Now, there's an interesting article out of Stephen Goddard talking about a complete meltdown of National Geographic and NASA, where all of these agencies and institutions who are part of this hoax are having to keep on selling it, even though we're having very obvious cooling trend here on planet Earth. And they've caught National Geographic misstating history regarding Greenland's ice cover. They caught NASA tinkering with the temperature data from the 1940s by altering it. It's just like Winston Smith out of 1984. Those past warm periods are an embarrassment to current government policy, therefore you will go in and you will revise them downward. They've been caught doing it in the Wikipedia entries. We're right actually where George Orwell warned we would be, where they go back and change the past history to make it support the current agenda. And there is an agenda because at the end of this month, the United Nations is going to launch their plan for sustainable global development, otherwise known as Agenda 21. And the whole sales pitch for humans to go along with this is that human activity is damaging the climate of planet Earth. You are making the world warmer. No, we are not. CO2 is up. Temperatures are down. Plant life is up. The plants love the increase in carbon dioxide. And it's not a huge increase. We're talking less than 0.1% of atmospheric carbon dioxide can be traced to human activity. Look at all these volcanoes that are erupting all over the place. Every single one of them is pouring more CO2 into the atmosphere than all of the cars of all the American people driven for an entire year. The carbon Nazis have been relying on the Atmospheric Observatory down on Mauna Loa on the Big Island to tell us that atmospheric carbon dioxide is on the increase. Mauna Loa is the top of an active volcano. What do volcanoes put out? Carbon dioxide. They are taking atmospheric carbon dioxide measurements on the top of a volcano that is pouring carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And right now, it's accelerating. I'm sure they're going to get great numbers. Look at how the CO2 is increasing. Yes, there's lava erupting all over the place. They're cherry-picking the data to sell this agenda. Oh, we have a record high temperature recorded at the airport over here. Yes, airports, good place to take the temperature because got all these jet aircraft belching out burning kerosene, all that asphalt multiplying the urban heat island effect. So they're out there with their one cherry-picked thermometer saying, see, look at this. Forget all about that snow and ice that you just had to deal with. Frost warnings, forget about that. We've got a temp thermometer with, look at how high that is. They're selling it as hard as they can. They're almost hysterical trying to sell human-caused global warming because without that, without the ability to guilt you into accepting the United Nations plan for Agenda 21, it's not going to go anywhere at all. Now, if you go to my article on ClimateGate, and I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the main page again during this coming commercial break, down at the bottom you will see all these quotes by all the luminaries of the global warming hysteria in which they say, look, even if it isn't real, we are using this to bring about the change we feel is necessary to the world. In other words, the attitude is it's okay for us to lie to you because we serve a higher purpose. Meanwhile, of course, solar output is in decline, and that's the reason the world is getting colder. Human activity is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the dominant factor in Earth's climate. Solar output, geothermal, which is acting up right now, and the slowly oscillating shape of Earth's orbit is what dominates climate. There are far more potent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, like water vapor and methane, but they targeted carbon dioxide because they could blame that on you to guilt you into paying carbon taxes, buying Al Gore's carbon credits, which have made him insanely wealthy, and to accept a global environmental authority over your quality of life, which is what this Agenda 21 is all about. Now, if all of these climatologists back in the 1990s were this wrong in their prognostication, and remember, back in the 1990s, the world was getting warmer, and they said, the world is getting warmer. Let's tell the human race it's their fault, and we'll get money and power and authority from them. And then Mother Nature went the other way, and they didn't see it coming. And if they're that wrong with what the climate is doing over the space of just 15 years, they are totally clueless about what's going to happen in 100 years. And if their science is that weak, they really do not have a justification to come knocking on our doors and say, hi, I'm from the United Nations. We need you to turn your lights down. It's time to tell the United Nations to take a hike, if for no other reason than they cannot rein in the actions of their member, Israel. If they can't get Israel to play by the rules, why should anybody else listen to what they have to say? Just something to think about. Apparently, the U.S. government has now granted permission for oil companies to start drilling in the Gulf of Mexico right near the location of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. In other words, having pricked that particular boil with disastrous results, they're going to go ahead and do it again. Cross their fingers, hope for the best. Wow. All righty, let's see. Now then, when we come on back, we're going to be talking about radioactivity. There's a couple of issues out there you need to be aware of. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Final segment of our program today. I just got an email. There's also a frost warning in Erie, Pennsylvania. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. And all of that global warming powder that's falling all over the planet here. All righty, I want to talk about radioactivity. It is a major issue. The recent forest fire around the Chernobyl area has taken much of the original plume from that disaster, put it back into the atmosphere. Fukushima continues to leak into the Pacific Ocean, and there are problems that have been going on for a long time that people don't even know about. Whether it's Hanford, WIP, it's a big stink that nobody wants you paying attention to because the government allowed it all to happen. And I saw this story over in Waking Times about how abandoned uranium mines plague the Navajo Nation. And it turns out, unfortunately, the Navajos living in their allocated territory are suffering a far higher than normal incidence of cancers. Now, it turns out during the height of the post-World War II nuclear development, the United States wanted to be as free from dependency on imported uranium as possible. And they discovered significant uranium deposits through the formerly worthless areas, desert areas of the reservation. And between 1944 and 1986, the U.S. government extracted 4 million tons of uranium ore for the weapons development project. The uranium mining companies, when they stopped, were not required to clean up the mess. They just walked away from the mines and the mine tailings and all of the toxic materials left over from that. And when I read this article, it reminded me of this film called Thunderheart, starring Val Kilmer. And it's loosely based on the incidents at the Pine Ridge Reservation, which led to the political imprisonment of Leonard Peltier. But one of the other subtexts in that story involved basically the exploitation of the Native American reservations for uranium mining and how it was poisoning downstream on the river, and people were getting sick. But hey, they're just Indians, who cares about them kind of an attitude. And by the way, it is a very good movie. I think it's my favorite Val Kilmer movie. And I really did like it. Now, there's another story that is coming up out of Ukraine that you need to be aware of, because Ukraine, of course, has nuclear power. They have 3,000 spent nuclear fuel rods being stored in the open air in metal casks at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They're so poorly stored that nuclear experts are saying this is a disaster waiting to happen. And this location is only 200 kilometers from the active war zone. One misplaced bomb or missile, there's going to be a major problem. It's going to be like Chernobyl all over again, possibly even worse. The money junkies love the money that they make off of these facilities, and hey, it's not our problem when it goes bad. All right, so let's back up here a little bit, talk about GMO here. There's an article over at Buleman WordPress, The Frightening GMO Food Fraud, and it's talking about how the FDA has arbitrarily declared GMO products under the category of GRAS, G-R-A-S, which stands as generally recognized as safe. And by doing so, exempts GMO from a lot of the testing which would be required for newly created chemicals or plants. And, of course, they're basically treating them as if the GMO are crossbreeds or hybrids through traditional hybridization techniques, cross-pollination, things like that, which occur in nature, and they're just taken advantage of. And by simply declaring these as GRAS, the FDA has created the situation where GMO plants are grown and put onto the market without any kind of adequate oversight. Because, hey, that makes Big Ag happy, and Big Ag writes big checks to the candidates running for office, and that's how life is in fascism. Now, here in Hawaii, we have two front lines, if you will, on the GMO conflict. One is down on Maui, where the citizens of Maui voted for a GMO moratorium, because all of these islands are used as experimental plots for GMO products that are not even approved yet. And they grow them out here in Hawaii because if they make a mistake, well, it's just the Hawaiians who could care. So down in Maui, they voted through a moratorium. The GMO companies found a cooperative judge who issued an injunction against enforcement of that referendum while it goes through the state legislature, and we're already told it's going to be next legislative year before they even look at it. And, of course, all during that time, the GMO companies can go on planting and experimenting with their frankenplants. The ones where you walk by and it goes, feed me. Now, the other front line is over on Kauai, where basically the GMO company Syngenta is planting experimental plots, and they're having to douse them with all kinds of chemicals, and they're literally across the street from residential and school areas. And Kauai is trying to organize protests against that. Unfortunately, Kauai's county government is just as corrupt as Maui's. And there's a group of activists centered around Maui Chun, who has been fighting this fight for years now on Kauai. And recently, these activists went all the way to Syngenta's corporate headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, to protest in front of the building. So the people know what is dangerous. The people have a right to decide what is going to be fed to them. And in the case of these GMO plants, they don't want to breathe the pollen. They don't want the pollen contaminating their crops. We're trying to get Malia on the show, as a matter of fact, here. Now then, a lot of people have been looking at this runaway, out-of-control mandating of vaccines that we're seeing from the federal government, state governments. You will get your vaccines. Is it just politics as usual and corruption? That's a big part of it. But it turns out that the United States Vaccine Court, which pays damages for people who are harmed or killed by vaccines, and that is funded through a vaccine excise tax that the U.S. government applies to all vaccines. And in the case of multi-vector vaccines, the excise is applied for each vector. So if you've got the MMR vaccine, that's 3 times the excise tax. So far, so good. It turns out the vaccine excise tax is generating tens of billions of dollars of revenue for the U.S. government. Only a tiny, tiny fraction of that is actually going to the vaccine injury settlements, and the rest is just being spent as general revenues. And that is a big financial motive for the government to just say, yeah, 49 vaccines, you got to have these 49 vaccines and 60 shots. You know, it's good for you, trust it. No, it's good for the bank account. It's good for the government that is desperate to stay ahead of the money junkies' debt machine. And that is why they're willing to look the other way when these vaccines cause harm. And yes, they set up the vaccine court to pay off the most obvious damage from vaccine, but the goal of the vaccine court was to limit total financial liability. The vaccine court gets to say what the damage is worth, not a jury of your peers. And the vaccine excise tax that was levied to fund the vaccine court settlement fund is actually being diverted into general revenues. So the U.S. government is now looking at a bill, the Vaccinate All Children Act of 2015. This was introduced by a Florida congresswoman that will basically say the states have to comply with federal vaccination guidelines or they don't get whatever money they're supposed to be getting. And it's all about forcing you to buy these products, making the pharmaceutical companies rich, adds more tax revenues to the government coffers, and whether or not they're actually effective or safe or even harmful is just irrelevant. It's all driven by the money junkie fever that has infected our government and our nation's leadership. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. A call to Rivero's Rangers. Contact your local talk radio stations. Point them at gcnlive.com. Ask them to please start carrying the programming from GCN. We are needing to get the message out to the American people. We need to get them the truth in this sea of lies in which we're drowning. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.